The Collaborating Conversation podcast is for avid book readers, book lovers, and authors. Listen to this podcast as we talk more about the art of writing, stories behind books, and the hands that created them. So stay tuned and enjoy our show.
Welcome to the Collaborating Conversations podcast. Today's episode is a deep dive into time travel theories within science fiction. All right. Welcome, Max.
Welcome.
It's good to have you.
It's been a long time since the last episode.
However long that was in terms of relative duration. Yeah.
Right. Relativity. It helps us dive more. Today we're talking about time travel. And I guess before we dive into the science fiction part of it, I guess we can spend some time explaining the logic behind it, although at a pretty high level, right? But the theory behind time travel, I guess at a high level, is that all objects in the universe move through space and time in a circular motion. So in theory, the idea is at some point, eventually, you will come back to a point in time that you were in the past. But again, like most theories, there are a lot of holes, right? There are a lot of, doesn't necessarily translate in practice. So in the case of time travel, some of the doubters, there's the grandfather paradox. Have you ever heard of that?
Is that the is that the Futurama one where he's his own grandfather?
Something like that, right? So it's, again, a young man finds out his great-grandfather was a serial killer, right? So it takes it upon himself to travel back in time to kill him. And now the question is, if it kills his grandpa, then who killed it? Technically, he was never born, right? So then who kills him after, I guess, that happens? There's also like the predestination paradox, an example being like religious, although, not trying to get into like political cause controversy, but it just says, if God has everything already planned out, how can humans have free will? Which the question in itself sort of pokes some holes into the practicality or how likely it is that this theory can be converted or, I guess, applied or be brought to reality.
Yeah.
5,000 foot overview. Hopefully, so now you can go be a nerd with your friends. Although, don't try it with a physicist.
It's interesting. Like, I think, if we look at, there's a lot of different theories around time travel out there. You have the multiversal theory that's become popular as of late. And I think mainly because of things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and stuff like that, where, it's, you create a branching, parallel universe, based off of some free will choice that's made, so every choice spins off a parallel universe, and that's the one that I think a lot of people are getting exposed to nowadays, although it's very different from the general thinking. Like if we look back years ago, where, you had movies like The Butterfly Effect and, other things where it's just like, if you go back in the past and you make one change, it has a ripple effect that's going to have an impact on like your current day. So it's very much a very different approach where it's like, in the multiversal theory, like if you go back in time and do something, it's not going to impact your timeline at all because your timeline,
is already set
based off of, past that past branching decision tree, right? So I think that's a very interesting splinter of, you know, theories, you know, and then you have like the, you know, the ultimate timeline, you know, one, which is based off of like the, you know, the butterfly effect type of one where, you know, it's like, oh, there's one set timeline and there are people who, you know, police the timeline or, you know, things that happen to ensure that the timeline happens. You know, they kind of played a little bit with that with, you know, with like Kang, you know, in the Marvel where, you know, they had the one, you know, I forget what they called it, the golden timeline or the sacred timeline. But there's you know, the Umbrella Academy also plays with that theory, right? Like, you know, there's one set timeline and you have people who police it to make sure that, you know, things happen as they're supposed to happen. But, you know,
that's actually, go ahead, sorry. Oh, no, I said that's actually been addressed in scientific research. And I would say that's one of the part of time travel that I would say there's a general consensus on, at least relative to the others, in a sense that most folks, at least most experts, agree that you can, going back in time will not change the future because, you know, things will just happen regardless, right? So, because things happen because they were, you know, some things were just meant to be. So, for example, if you went back in time and killed, you know, Hitler, then, you know, the world wars would have probably gotten started by someone else. If you went back in time and tried to prevent the, you know, the start of the pandemic by taking out patient zero, then you might inadvertently become patient zero yourself, right? The idea being, yes, you can try to change things, but they will happen regardless, especially when it comes to like major events. But even then, that's still, everything is very theoretical with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it builds off of the theory that you know, if time travel existed, we would have already experienced time travelers. In terms of, you know, like being able to impact the existing timeline, right? Because it's just like, you know, oh, if you know, if time travel comes to exist, then people would go back, you know, and do like, you know, oh, let's go, you know, kill Hitler and, you know, do the most basic things where it's just like, let's do these things, right? And since those things haven't happened, you know, then I think it reinforces the theory that you can't impact, you know, present reality because, you know, so I think that's probably where a lot of that theory comes from in terms of believing things work that way because, you know, if it could happen, it would have already happened.
So like, who came up with time travel though? Like the concept? A lot of people credit Einstein, but I wonder who came up with the concept. So apparently, the concept of time travel has been around for centuries, with early examples appearing in works like the 14th century story, The Wonderful Counselor, and the 16th century play, The Fatal Dowry. The earliest known scientific discussion of time travel was the late 19th century, when Samuel Tolver Preston Jr. published an article titled Grammar of the Lazarus Language in the American Philosophical Society's Proceedings. Okay, so it looks like it was fictional first before it became scientifical.
Yeah, it was popularized by H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. So I think that was probably the pivotal sci-fi novel that brought it into the mainstream populace. So that, you know, that's so it's been around for a while.
Yeah, 14th century. That's a long time ago. I wasn't alive back then.
Yeah, I don't think any of us were. Or we have our own time travelers.
So like, one thing I've noticed in like some movies, and even I've seen it a lot in animes as well, is whenever you have time travel, whenever the traveler leaves, they usually talk about, oh, you're never going to remember this, right? And obviously they forget, right? And then you have some time where they're like, hey, you know, I'm gonna use this tech on you so that like you don't remember. Or sometimes you have things where, especially with dramatic incidents, right? So have you watched the Time Traveler's Wife?
I have, yeah. That's a good movie.
Yeah. So the kid loses his mom in a car accident as a young kid, and he tries to go back as a teenager to stop it, but then his adult self stops him saying, hey, like, it's not going to work. Like,
Yeah.
I've already tried, right? So is it possible that, I guess, even if you came in touch, realistically speaking, right? If you met someone and they told you I was from the future, would you believe them?
So I think this is an interesting point because so a number of thoughts here before I answer that question. So like if you look to, you know, so like thinking through the different theories like in sci-fi, and I think there's been a number of different movies and books that have touched on this area. So like so maybe let's just list out like some of the main concepts, you know, the variations there. So I think the one that you've talked about before is kind of like the predetermination or the predestination one, where it's just like if you go back and change something in the past, that thing's still going to happen. And I think Marvel touched on that with like the What If series with Doctor Strange. So I think like that's the best illustration of that theory in action. You know, it's this concept of in Doctor Who they call it set points in time. There are set moments in history or in the future history that must happen, and that you can do nothing to change those. Everything else is changeable. Everything else can be modified. But there are these set points that, regardless of whatever you try to do, that thing will still happen. Because it has to happen in order for the universe to like not fall apart, right? And so it's an interesting theory because it's like, you know, not everything is a set point, but you know, maybe like the loss of a loved one is a set point that you can't change, right? You know, and I think that with the time traveler's wife, you know, with that, you know, I think they were playing around with that theory, you know, a bit more, you know. If like, you know, you can't change this, it's not going to change anything.
Yeah. When you were saying that, I just got chills thinking of this scene in the Avengers, I want to say Endgame. You know, Thanos said you could not live with your failure. Or did that bring you back to me?
Yeah.
Right, because they were like doing all these things, trying to recollect and trying to prepare, trying to, you know, basically try to create a situation where Thanos wasn't there, but it's like he was I guess he could be considered a set point, right? There was no way to get around him. They had to face him heads on.
Yeah. And something what's the book or series to your other point around forgetting? I think they played around with this a lot in the Butterfly Effect because only the main character who was traveling through, you know, back into his past self, only he knew, you know, that something was different, right? And they played through this whole thing with like, you know, him having like some physiological response, like information being forcefully put into his head, right? Like, you know, like he started bleeding or hemorrhaging, you know, and stuff like that because like, you know, his head was being filled with new memories that he hadn't had before because of all the changes, you know, from the past, right? But I think and so that's a theory, right? But you know, because it would be your lived experience would be like you would forget because your memories would shift and change to reflect the new reality, right? So everything would seem normal to you except for the person who traveled through time, in which case they would have that full knowledge of like what, you know, the alternate existence. It's to answer your question, I think if you met a time traveler, would you know? I guess if
I told you, would you believe it? Because you wouldn't necessarily know, right? Because let's say they were dressed as something you'd like never seen before. You were like, okay, what's wrong with this person? Or I wonder what this new trend is, right? But if they told you flat out, I'm a time traveler, and then went on to explain a bunch of things, I guess would you believe them, or to what extent would you believe them?
Yeah, it's hard, right? It's hard to believe someone in a universe like ours where, you know, we don't experience, you know, strange phenomena like that, right? Like it's hard to, you know, if I lived in a Marvel Cinematic Universe, right, where we had superheroes, you know, or we had people with powers, you know, and all this stuff, and someone's just like, hey, I'm from a different timeline, you know, then be like, okay, you know, it's like, well, you know, we got a guy who can fly, and we have someone, you know, who, you know, who can shoot lasers, right? You know, it's like, so time travel, sure, why not, right? But like, we don't live in that type of universe, right? We live in a universe that's grounded at least in some clearly explainable laws. If not clearly explainable, then you can theorize them away, right? You know, and so we don't experience the sci-fi on a regular basis, right? You know, it's mainly in like fiction, so it would be difficult without seeing some form of advanced technology that we can't explain, right? So like, if someone's just like, you know, someone came to me and says like, hey, I'm from the future, you know, my first reaction would be like, I don't believe you. Prove you're from the future, right? And if they were to put, and then if they pulled out, you know, a device or something that was clearly not from this time, right? Like something, you know, with my understanding of where technology is, you know, and having a pretty good understanding of that, seeing something where I'm just like, yeah, that's not possible today, then, you know, I would be like, okay, I'm listening to you, right? Like, you know, and then you get into like the traditional, you know, the traditional like things of just like, all right, well, if you say you're from the future, like prove what's going to happen tomorrow, right? You know, which if someone traveled back in time, I feel like you should be prepared to do that, right? So like, you know, in order to bring weight to what you're saying, you should be able to prove a series of future events that are going to happen, assuming your presence here doesn't change those events. Because I think that, you know, there has been sci-fi where that's the case, right? Where, you know, because you went into the past, you've changed the course of events. So, you know, the random, the randomized model of existence, right? Like could cause things to go a different route, right? It's like, so, you know, it's like winning the lottery, right? Like, oh, give me the numbers for tomorrow, right? It's like, oh, well, my existence here has changed the randomness of the potential numbers for lottery, right? You know, so it's just like, you know, so then you start to get in, and then, you know, and that heavily, you know, starts to become influenced by, you know, what the actual rules of the universe are for, you know, for time travel, right? You know, because like we have theories, we have what we think it'll be, but you know, then when you actually experience some instance of time travel, right, that's when the actual rules get tested, right? Like that's when you actually validate whatever those rules are, you know. And it's interesting because an area of like time travel that a lot of people don't think about is the Earth is moving, as is our sun, right?
Right.
And so in order for you to travel back in time, you have to back and forward in time, you have to be able to translocate your body in consciousness, not just, you know, not just in time, but in space, right? And so, like,
I keep going back to that joke I had before we started recording. If a man boards a plane from San Francisco to Atlanta, I guess from Atlanta to San Francisco, is it traveling back in time? No, but like, so with the device thing, I'd be a bit worried though, because if I saw a device, I would like take me to the future.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, because I think I'm not sure how ready the time traveler would be to have to prove, right? Because again, the idea is like they're coming from a time where that's relatively normal, right? So you know, for somebody,
there should be some if it's relatively normal, then there should be some way, you know, they would have planned for some way to be able to prove it.
Because it depends on the time that you're going to as well, right? Like, for example, if you're coming back to 2022, right? Yeah, because it's morally, like, if we were to get if time travel was to become a reality today, it would totally be considered a thing. Like, it would have adoption, right? Compared to if you go back to, let's say, 1800s, I'm not sure how widely accepted or adopted it would have been. And you can see that with startups, right? Like one of the actually the first guy to ever write a check to Mark Zuckerberg started a social media company back in the 90s, but it flopped because people weren't ready. They were like, why would I can meet people in real life. What is this? Right? And then And you fast forward to 2004, and it's like, oh, so you mean to tell me I don't have to go anywhere? I can just stay in the comfort of my home and just meet people, right? And things like Airbnb, so on and so forth. It just 10, 20, 30 years ago, it was like, no, I'm not opening my home up to strangers. What is this?
I mean, I think that's also a relic, not a relic, but like a sign of like the progress of technology, right? Because like the internet in the early 2000s is very different from the internet in the early 1990s.
Oh, yeah.
Because definitely. Only the people who were pretty well off or affluent or in the tech space in the early days were actually on the internet in the early 90s, right? Versus the late 90s or the early 2000s, in which computers started to become more ubiquitous now into the 2000s, into the 2010s, then the whole mobile device explosion and like having the internet in your hand, right? So I think it's like the progress of technology in that respect enables or doesn't enable certain advances. But yeah, I see your point. It's like in terms of the adoption of time travel, like I think there's this interesting book. It was I forget the name of the book. I think it might have been a short story actually. And in the short story, it was talking about faster than light travel, and they on Earth, it's like present day, and then like these aliens show up on a ship. They've used faster light travel to get to Earth, and they show up and they get off of their ship, and they're just like, we're here to conquer your planet. It's like we're advanced alien species, like we're in charge now, right? And then like they're on like this wooden ship with like these like really primitive early weapons, right? And they show up, in our present day, and like we have advanced weapons, and we just kind of like blow them out of the water, right? And it's like, and it plays around this concept where it's just like it's actually not like the progress of technology that leads to faster light travel. It's actually something really simple that a lot of other species across the galaxy have figured out much sooner than humanity has, but humanity has advanced technologically in other areas that all these other species haven't. But all these other species have faster than light travel, right? And so it's just this interesting concept of like, maybe it's not like super advanced technology that leads us to do something that we view as being super advanced. It's actually just some breakthrough that we didn't have, right? And I'm wondering, time travel could be that, where it's just like we think we need advanced technology in order to do time travel, but maybe time travel manifests in other ways, right? Like there's a theory around time travel that you can only travel back in time to where you previously existed, right? Because so it limits like how far you can travel back in time, because you can only travel your consciousness back in time, right? You can't travel your physical body back in time, right? And so it's just like, well, and then in that instance, you have time travelers all the time. It's just, they can only go back to like an earlier version of themselves, and so it's, there's a lot of different theories out there that, might or might not explain why we haven't seen time travelers, or at least we haven't recognized time travelers in the traditional sense.
So the memory thing, I just looked it up because I knew there was a theory associated with it. And it's actually one of the theory that people say prove that time travel exists. And it's called the Nelson Mandela Effect. And it's a phenomenon used to describe, it's a term used to describe phenomenon about people forgetting events of well-known event personalities, right? So the Nelson Mandela, the case there being that there were rumors, right, that he died in the 80s, whereas he was released and went on to live another 20 years, became president and things like that, right? And apparently that this is a trick used by time travelers, by implanting false memory into people, allegedly.
Yeah.
That's like, okay, well why would you do that though? It just seems like of all the things you can implant, why implant false memories, right?
Yeah.
anything, implant good memories, give people like creativity, right? Boom, 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 boom.
I think.
So yeah, like there's.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so there's a nice little write-up here. The Mandela Effect has been used to explain away everything from small details like the death of Burt Reynolds to more major events like the 9/11 terrorist attacks. There are a number of theories about how the Mandela Effect works, but one popular explanation is that it is the result of time travelers changing history. This theory suggests that there are people who have access to time travel technology who are using it to change events in the past. This would explain why so many people have memories of things that never actually happened. It is also a way, the theory also suggests that the Mandela Effect is a way for the time travelers to communicate with each other by planting false memories in people's heads. They can send messages for each other without anyone else being aware of it. Of course, this is all just speculation, as there's no evidence for the theory that the Mandela Effect is caused by time travel. However, it is an interesting idea that has gained a lot of traction in recent years.
I think some of that is we getting into talking about like how memory actually works, right? Because I think a lot of that is actually just the human memory isn't that great.
It's not. It's really,
and something that's actually become more, become more widely known is that, when you remember something, you're actually remembering the last time you remembered it. And I've watched this happen in my own life where when you remember something, you're actually remembering the last time you remember it. And so what that leads to is it actually leads to your perception of past events changing over time. Right. And so an example of this, is, let's say you remember some event, with a relative, 15 years ago, and it's a pretty memorable event. And you remember that event, maybe every time you get with them or every time you talk with them over the course of 10 to 15 years, the actual facts of that event begin to differ from reality. And I've seen this happen in my own life where, I'll have a conversation with my wife and how, we remember a past event, especially early on in a relationship. And like, she may replay that memory in a way that's different from how I remembered it. But, like we both stand by like, this is actually how I remember that event. Right. And I've even seen it happen with my parents. Right. It's like remembering past events from when I was a kid. I'm just like, no, that's not actually how that happened. Right. But they're just like, no, like this is how, like, I remember this. But it's, our memory is so unreliable because when you remember that memory, you may have forgotten key details or aspects, or you interject, your existing worldview or understanding of the world into that memory, and it's particularly true of like bad memories or past events where people change drastically over time, right? And so I think in those instances, you remember the past differently from what actually happened. And so I think that, that's probably a better explanation versus like time travel.
Looking for an exciting space adventure book, a romantic young adult story, and a fantastic sci-fi read? Get the Foundra by award-winning author Emmanuel M Arriaga today and prepare to feed your imagination with never-ending thrill ride.
So, example you gave as far as like dealing with other people, wouldn't that count as like perspective? Because let's say there's you take that an event, even that happened like 5 minutes ago. If you ask 10 different people what happened, you're very likely to get 10 different versions. I mean, you'll have common denominators. You'll have things that people definitely agree on. So let's say you see a fight, or you see a car accident, or you see, a parade, right? Folks may agree, okay, this is how it started, right? Or this guy did that. Then as you kind of get into the weeds of the details, things might be explained slightly differently. just because of the potential vintage point?
Yeah, I think there's that, but I'm talking more about like the core facts of an event actually differing. So I have an example. So like when me and my wife first met, right? Like we had I joked that, like she didn't want anything to do with me, right? And it was, I joked, but there's some truth to that, right? And then like over time, like, she warmed up to me, but if you, and I have like Facebook messages and stuff like that from the past that I have as evidence to like that, right? But like if you ask her today, like in her, like she actually flips the scenario where she's like, oh, actually, like, you didn't want anything to do with me, and I was super interested in you, but it's like the complete opposite facts, right? And I think it's just because like over the years, like when we tell that story, like it changes, that those facts shift and change in how we remember the world, and how we view our lives today, right? And I think like that's the perfect example of where memory is unreliable, because memory isn't, I think even in our court systems today, right? Like, witness testimony is so unreliable for like, past events where like it doesn't hold up in court as much, to like hard evidence, right? Like someone saying like, oh, I saw it happen this way, doesn't carry as much weight as it used to many years ago, right? Now it's just like, what is the video evidence? Like, what is the, otherwise, like, we don't believe you, right? And so I think I think it's just like we've understand more around like how unreliable memory is. And I think that plays into, that theory of, maybe it's not necessarily that, people are influencing, people's memories through time travel. It's more so just like people suck at remembering things. But it's an interesting theory, to say the least. I think...
Yeah, I'll definitely read up on that, because that's crazy to me. When you remember something, you're actually remembering the last. So you're going back to the last instance
when you
remembered. So when I think of the time I was playing soccer with my dad, or hanging out with my mom years ago, instead of that moment, I'm really just remembering 2 weeks ago when I last had that memory.
Yeah, you're remembering what you remembered the last time that you remembered it.
That is... wow.
Yeah, and it's actually really interesting if you look at video of like past experiences or moments. Because when you do that, especially something that happened a long time ago, it's almost like replaying the memory. And it's almost like foreign to you because you're just like, oh, wow, I don't remember this happening this way at all, right? Because you, like, how you remember things, because, if you think about, like, our minds are doing filtering all the time, right? And so, like, our subconscious doesn't pull in every detail around us at that time and moment. It only pulls in, like, the important things that we need to get through that situation, right? So you can have a very narrow perspective, to your earlier point, around a specific memory that over time gets narrower and narrower until it actually changes the true facts or experience of that moment. And so it's just interesting, like, how our brains work in that regard. And it's also why emotions play such a powerful part in our memory, because a lot of times when we remember a situation, we don't remember the situation as much as we remember the emotions that we felt in that situation. And especially if they're really strong emotions, right? And really strong emotions also can cloud the facts of what happened in that situation, because the emotions are overpowering, right? And so that's why it's really important to it's really important, especially when you have negative experiences with people. It's really important to like address those sooner rather than later, because over time, like, they can blow out of proportion, and now you're like fighting against like this false image of the bad experience that someone had that's 10 times worse than it actually was, and then it, and so it's interesting, just how powerful emotions play into our memory. But what's interesting, since we're talking on this concept of memory, what's interesting is over time, we remember the positive experiences more over the negative. And I've actually seen this happen with older relatives, right? Like, when you talk with an older relative, right, like about certain things, like they will remember the positive aspects of something and not so much all the negative aspects of something from a long time ago. And, it clouds their like, it's like, oh, like I didn't have any issues with you when you were a kid. It's just like, actually, no, you had a ton of issues, but you just don't remember. For whatever reason, you've created selective memory to think I was a perfect child, right?
It's like, I couldn't tell because we always butted heads. Oh, man. Wait, so like one last question, I guess, with the memory thing. Okay, so when we remember something, we're not actually remembering the time it happened. We're just going back to the last instance at which we remembered it, right? So if that's the case, wouldn't it technically be possible, or maybe should I say impossible, to forget stuff? Because your memory, right, like your when you remember something right after it happens, like that's pretty vivid, right? So then as you remember it again, you're going back to that vivid instance. So then it should just remain vivid throughout.
No. So because you're remembering the last time you remembered, you are remembering the details that you remembered the last time you remembered. And so the moment you're off of that, the actual memory, the details start to change or slip, right? Because then the emotions you felt in that situation start to come more into play, right? And so it's you start to lose details over time, especially the further apart that you remember, because our memory is actually not very great. Over time, which is why it's really important to like catalog, write things down, record notable moments. It's interesting, right? Like we have all these Nest hubs around the house, right? And we have photos from like our life, played across them, and I can't tell you how many photos I see now where I'm just like, I don't remember that photo at all, right? But it's like, it's clearly me in that photo.
I literally just had that happen. A friend sent me, actually her families have been friends. So her mom sent me this picture, and this was allegedly taken my freshman year in college. And it was like after church. And I was just like, I don't remember this. And I have this little girl on my shoulder, right? She's like sitting on top of me. And I was like, I don't know who this girl is. I've never seen her in my life yet.
Yeah.
Here she is right there. And I guess, she was definitely comfortable enough to get on my shoulders.
Yeah.
This was like 2013, 2014. Yeah. So not even that long ago.
Yeah. But I mean, to kind of bring it back, it's like, maybe time travel is used that to their advantage, right? Like,
so time travel called me and he was like, you don't need to know this person anymore.
Well, I mean, no, just like the unreliability of human memory, maybe you can start changing things in the past, that maybe aren't as notable, and they have a pretty significant impact on the future, right? It's like the whole, the ripple effect.
What aren't notable, would they really have a notable impact?
It depends,
so,
right?
Let's say you like, because when I think of like not notable, right? in my mind, I'm thinking, let's say I like, I'm wearing a what? What color is this? Dark grayish. Let's say this is my favorite shirt, and I wear it as many times as I can, right? And I'm trying to like wear it one day, and then I guess I'm like, you know what? You should wear blue shirt today. Those are like the kind of changes I'm thinking about. But then again, me going from a dark gray to a blue shirt, I mean, really, how much, what's the impact of that?
Well, you never know, right? Like that's so like the perfect example, right? And I think this is just fresh in mind because we just started watching the Umbrella Academy, right? But it's like, it's like, oh well, you assassinate, X person, who owns a bakery, right? And then, that person's dead, and then their son takes over the bakery, and their son's not really good at it, and so like, they make the food for that day, and then the person who regularly comes to that bakery, he comes the day that the son's taking it over for the first time, and he gets sick off of the the thing that he normally gets because the son doesn't make it right, and because of that, right. Then he actually doesn't go to work that day, which causes like this major thing to get delayed, and then they have to rush production because they want to launch on time, and then that causes them to cut corners, and then it leads to the Hindenburg blowing up, right? So it's like it's like the ripple effect of like one person who is a baker who just happens to be in the path of someone who's a critical part of this component. You never know, right? Like that's what makes it so interesting is like that ripple effect of what changes what changes could have impact. Any change could have impact, right? Like the way the air blew that day, because you appeared suddenly caused, it to get a little bit colder, which caused someone to, feel a chill that they wouldn't have otherwise felt, which caused them to turn back into the house and grab a jacket, which delayed them, a minute, which caused them to get into a car accident, which caused them to die, and which caused them to not be a pivotal person, and like discovering this new technology 10 years later, right?
It wasn't that drastic, but I had something like that happen to me like three and a half months ago. So I was driving and I was trying to take this exit, and I have the voice muted on maps. So usually I have to like take a look to know I guess I need to kind of get ahead. So when I noticed that it was around, I want to say like 0.4 miles away, but there was traffic, right? So I was like, okay, I think I can still make it. So as I'm trying to shift, I had to shift 3 lanes over to get to the exit. As I'm trying to shift, I shift 1 lane over, and then the second lane, I'm dealing with this car where he's acting like he's waiting for me. But then whenever I'm starting to lean into the lane, he starts like speeding up a little bit, right? So we play this game for like 15 seconds, and I'm thinking, you know what? He'll be wrong because he's behind me, and I'm just like, I can't, like either you go or you let me. And this whole like halfway kind of dance, I can't do that. So I start coming in. He acts like he's speeding up, and I still commit. And then he switches over to the next lane. And, when he gets there, he looks at me, I look at him, he's looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, I don't, what do you want me to do? And so we're both stuck there. And I'm looking at him like, man, like if you weren't there, I would have just gone to that lane, right? Lo and behold, right as I guess I, look back, I guess in front of me, I hear a sound, bam. A car like accident. Another car came from behind and just ran straight into him. And I was like, wow, that could have been me potentially. But he was very calm. He looked like he'd been there before. He got out with his phone, started taking pictures. Right. Meanwhile, I would have like, wait, what's going on? And also the last time I was hit, it was like a hit and run. Person hit me and just took off.
Oh, wow.
I would have been like, please don't go.
Yeah. It's probably why I got out and started taking pictures right away. That way you can catch the license plate of the car before it pieces.
Yeah, but the person stayed, and I was like, okay, well, and then I was just trying to process it because I'm like, oh man, that really could have been me. And by the time I sort of came around, I already missed my exit. So, but beautiful thing with maps, rerouting.
Yeah,
you can always get home. But yeah, memory is a beautiful thing. I'll definitely read up on that concept because I have my mind blown right now. This could actually be a stand-up bit. Because every time I start to remember, I'm like, you know what, guys? I remember the last time I remembered.
Are you still doing the stand-up?
I haven't since COVID, actually. But I'm gonna do something this week.
Nice.
So yeah, I have a nice little 5 minutes, but I don't know. I have not 5 minutes set prepared. But some locations, it's like 3 or 5 minutes, anywhere from 3 to 4 minutes. So I may have to adjust depending on, because the place I go to will be like the first time I go there. So I don't know what their process is. Yeah, it'll be interesting. Be interesting to see how that goes. Hopefully I don't get any tomatoes thrown in my face.
Yeah.
The worst thing I've seen happen. Okay, sorry.
No. I was gonna say, so like, we could probably start wrapping up. What's your interesting thing of the week?
Interesting thing of the week. Well, apparently, when you remember something, you're not just. I would say that tops it all. Honestly, I'm still mind blown by that. I'm still trying to process it. Yeah, that's my interesting of the week. Allegedly, when you remember something, you're not remembering the actual event. You're just going back to the last time you had a memory of said event. So that's my interesting. Yeah, that's my interesting thing of the week. What about you?
For me, I would say it's the whole collapse of the auto lending industry right now.
The auto lending industry?
Yeah, there's been like a number of Graham Steffens, who is a YouTuber that I listen to. He has this really great podcast or YouTube. I guess it's a virtual video podcast where he talks about the auto lending industry and the bubble that's popping right now. Because right now it's you have default rates as high as 20% in some states for auto loans, which is ridiculously high. And so it's just an interesting thing. And you can kind of look at the economic stuff happening and kind of see that. But yeah, it was just an interesting thing. Probably for the past few weeks, just been digging into some of the data there. There's articles, there's a few YouTubers and other folks who have been digging into this topic, and so there are some threads blowing up on Twitter. But yeah, it's a big deal, because the auto lending industry is not really regulated. But yeah, so it's just interesting thing that's been on my mind, just kind of watching. It's like the ripple effects of the economy, right? It's like, I'm this big believer in like systems thinking, right? So it's just like, what are the different systems at play at different times? And like, you can see all the things signaling, all the things triggering, the bubble bursting in the auto lending industry, right? Like specifically around, high inflation causing people to cut back on their expenses, which was one of the top things you cut when you're trying to save money. Oh, your expensive car bill, right? Like first thing people cut typically, and so especially if you have a car that you can't afford or a car that maybe you don't need, so yeah, it's just interesting thing.
Wait, so what happens? So is it possible that some of these lending companies are going to go bankrupt?
Absolutely.
So what if you owe money? So let's say you have a car loan and you're able to make payments, and then that company goes bankrupt.
Oh, your debt's too valuable. They'll sell your debt, in like a bankruptcy sale to pay money to their creditors. No, you're not getting out of the debt. They sell your debt.
They sell the debt for like pennies on the dollars. What if I
Yeah,
can
but
just
they sell the full debt. So like they may sell the debt, but you are still bound to the contract of that debt. So they're selling the contract.
So usually, because the contract is usually cheaper, no? Because what they do is they sell the contract at a discounted rate, but then the folks who get the contract, they try to collect the full value. It's the same thing with like debt collectors, right? Whenever they're buying up those, debt, they're
usually it's not individually though. Usually it's like the portfolio. So if you're trying to like buy your own debt, you'd probably need a lot more money because you'd be buying like a whole ton of people's debt.
Wow.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's just like, can I just buy my debt for a cheaper amount?
Right. So,
no.
Yeah.
Typically not.
To exit. It's like, it's not my fault. I did my part.
Yeah. No.
I did my part.
Typically, they sell the portfolio of debt. They sell it as a bundle for a lot of money. So it's not like individual lenders.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, another interesting thing, and our podcast listeners probably won't be able to view this, but when this podcast goes up on YouTube, those folks will be able to see it. But I just had a new piece of character concept art created for Foundra. That is the first piece done for a Vempiir, which is one of the species in Foundra. And so this is the piece here. Yeah. So it's just Vempiir, they're one of the species. They're just more, they have like elements of like vampires, they're inspired by that. But yeah, this specific character's name is Norma. So yeah, just decided another cool little thing, working with my
welcome, new character.
Huh?
We've been waiting for you. I say, welcome, new character. We've been waiting for you.
Yeah. Right now I'm trying to, I have all the main characters done that I've been wanting to get done, at least for the books that are live. But there are some side characters of different species that I've been wanting to get done for a while. So I've started slowly working on those. And so there'll probably be more pieces coming out over the next few months, just of, new characters that are more side characters, not necessarily main characters, but, from different species.
Nice.
Cool. Well, this has been a good chat. I know Mr. Anonymous couldn't make our podcast today, but I think...
Mr. Anonymous.
Yeah. But it was, we were still able to have it, so I'm excited. We jumped into, a conversation about time travel, which was cool.
Yes. So now I will travel back to the kitchen and make something to eat. But yeah, thank you, folks, and we'll catch you at the next episode.
Catch you on the next one. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Check out our podcast on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcasts if you enjoyed the show. For more books and inspiring stories from today's authors, please subscribe to our podcast.